It began like most spring storms in southern Missouri. Humid air, a sky too quiet, and the kind of stillness that makes your bones uneasy before the first clap of thunder rolls in. But at exactly 4:42 that afternoon, the clouds over the outskirts of Aurora turned an eerie shade of green. Margaret Caldwell had lived here for more than 70 years, and she knew what that color meant. She had seen it twice before. Once when she was a girl of 13 and a tornado ripped the roof clean off their barn, and again 3 decades later when she lost her husband in a storm that came without mercy and took more than just shingles and wood. That green, she always said, meant that the sky was holding its breath right before it screamed. She stood on the porch of the farmhouse her father had built with his own hands, now faded and weathered with time, the white paint long since peeled away by years of sun and wind. The roof leaked in 2 places, the front steps creaked so loud they'd scare off rabbits, but Margaret never complained. After her husband, Harold, passed from a sudden stroke, she'd stayed. She'd lost her only son, Daniel, in the war in Afghanistan, and though the house grew quieter each year, she never left. Some roots, she believed, run too deep to be pulled up. The radio had been warning folks for nearly 30 minutes now. Local authorities urged residents to seek immediate shelter, calling this not just a thunderstorm, but a confirmed EF4 tornado with winds topping 170 miles per hour, bearing down fast on Lawrence County. Margaret listened but didn't flinch. Her steps were already measured. She had one place left that could be called safe, an old concrete storm cellar buried beneath the barn out back. Her father poured that slab after the 1957 outbreak, and she'd kept it stocked with bottled water, canned beans, first aid supplies, and warm blankets, just in case the sky ever turned green again.
She was locking the screen door when she saw the first headlight, then another, and another. What came down County Road 17 wasn't the usual stream of pickup trucks or a neighbor's tractor beating the storm. No, this was a swarm of motorcycles, gleaming chrome machines fighting sideways winds and sheets of rain. They came like a low thunder of their own, roaring and wobbling under the weight of crosswinds. Margaret squinted through the downpour, her heart skipping as the first of the riders skidded into the gravel shoulder at the end of her drive. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing thick black leather, his helmet streaked with rain. Behind him, more riders came, 10, 20, 30, maybe more, all soaked to the bone, struggling to stay upright on slick wheels. These men weren't just any group passing through. Their patches were bold, unmistakable, a lion's head flanked by wings. They were the Rogue Lions Motorcycle Club, one of the oldest and most misunderstood clubs in this part of the country. Margaret had heard about them over the years, rumors and headlines, some charitable rides for veterans, and some stories better left in the past. Most folks might have turned off the porch light and locked the door. After all, 70-odd bikers pulling up outside your property during a tornado warning isn't exactly the picture of comfort. But Margaret didn't move. Then she saw one of them fall. His motorcycle had slid sideways on the wet gravel, and 2 others ran to help him up. He was limping, clutching his left arm, clearly hurt. And just behind them, the sky had grown darker, heavier, twisting in ways no sky should. The air had changed. The tornado wasn't minutes away. It was almost here. Margaret made her decision in that moment, not based on logic or fear or caution. She grabbed the flashlight from the wall by the door and stepped out into the wind. Her dress whipped around her knees as she waved both arms above her head. "Over here!" she shouted, though the wind nearly took her breath away. The lead rider turned, his visor dripping with rain, confusion written all over his face. "There's a storm cellar behind the barn," she hollered. "It's concrete. It'll hold. You'll die out here if you stay." The rider stared at her like he wasn't sure if she was real. Then he lifted his visor. He was in his late 50s, his beard silver, his eyes sharp but weary. "Ma'am, do you know who we are?" Margaret stepped forward without hesitation. "I know exactly who you are. And I also know that tornado don't give a damn what's on your jacket. So unless you want your whole crew sucked into the sky, get them off those bikes and follow me. Now." There was a pause, just long enough for the wind to roar. Then the man turned to his brothers and barked out orders. Within seconds, the sound of rumbling engines gave way to boots pounding against the ground as dozens of bikers followed the old woman toward shelter. Behind them, the sky split open. The cellar door groaned open with the sound of rust scraping against rust, barely audible over the rising howl of the wind. 3 of the bikers heaved the steel panels upward, while Margaret held her flashlight steady, the beam cutting through rain and panic. One by one, the riders ducked into the narrow stairwell. The space below wasn't meant for this many, maybe 20, maybe 30 people at most. But by the time the last rider stumbled down, wet and shaking, Margaret had counted 79 men packed into the space like cattle before a storm. The old concrete walls had held through decades of neglect, and the shelves lining the back wall were still sturdy, still stocked. Bottles of water, boxes of crackers, cans of chili, a stack of wool blankets folded with precision only someone like Margaret could maintain. She didn't bother to sit down. Instead, she stepped to the center of the room, her flashlight sweeping across faces. Bearded, scarred, young and old, strangers with storm in their eyes. "Is anyone injured?" Her voice wasn't loud, but it was firm, practiced. Years ago, she'd been a nurse at the Veterans Hospital in Kansas City. Those instincts never left her. "Razor's hurt," someone called out from the back. "Wiped out on the road. Might have broken something." Margaret moved through the crowd, which parted for her like a reverent tide. She found a man, not much older than 30, sitting against the wall with his left arm cradled to his chest. His face was streaked with dirt and rain, and pain flickered behind his eyes. "What's your name, sweetheart?" she asked gently. The man blinked, as if the word sweetheart had never been used on him before. "Razor, ma'am." "Well, Razor," she said, kneeling beside him, "I'm going to take a look. It'll hurt some, but I've got a gentle touch, I promise." The others watched as she worked. Her hands were steady, her tone calm. She examined his arm, felt along the bone, then fashioned a makeshift splint using a thick magazine, 2 scarves, and some medical tape from her emergency kit. Razor winced but didn't complain. When she finished, she gave him 2 aspirin from a dusty bottle and poured him a paper cup of water. "Keep it elevated," she said. "You'll be just fine." Then the storm hit. At first, it was just a low rumble, like a freight train somewhere off in the distance. But within seconds, the entire cellar shuddered. The walls didn't move, but the air shifted, compressed, tightened. The sound became a scream, not from any person, but from nature itself. Dust fell from the ceiling. A few men whispered prayers. Someone cursed under their breath. And through it all, Margaret stood still. "This cellar has held through worse," she said, voice sharp and clear. "It's built deep and strong. Stay low, stay calm. We'll be all right." A man stepped forward, one of the older bikers. He wore a patch with the word President stitched in red thread beneath a roaring lion's head. His beard was streaked with gray, and he looked like he hadn't slept properly in years. "Name's Jim," he said. "Jim McKinley. Most call me Chief." Margaret nodded. "Margaret Caldwell. Most call me Maggie." There was a beat of silence. Then Chief said, "Thank you for letting us in. You didn't have to." Maggie looked at him square in the eye. "If I hadn't, I'd be waking up to 79 ghosts. That's not something I could live with." The tension began to break then. Blankets were passed around, thermoses of coffee poured and shared. Granola bars and peanut butter crackers were handed out without hesitation. Maggie moved through the room like a mother hen with steel nerves, checking on each man, offering a smile here, a word of comfort there. She sat down on an old crate and told them a story about how her late husband, Harold, had insisted on reinforcing the cellar after the storm of '57.
Said he wouldn't marry me unless I had a place to hide when the sky got mad, she said, chuckling. He always said I had a soft spot for strays. Guess he was right. The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it was real. Slowly, shoulders dropped. Tension gave way to tired relief. Chief looked at her curiously. You said earlier you knew who we were. How? Maggie didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached into the pocket of her cardigan and pulled out a small, weathered photo. She held it out. My son, she said. Daniel Caldwell. Called himself Ghost when he rode. Was part of your club before he joined the Army. Chief stared at the photograph. The young man in the picture wore a leather vest, a shy smile, and eyes full of purpose. There was silence in the cellar, until a biker from the back, older, his voice thick with emotion, stepped forward. I rode with Ghost, he said softly, 2 years before he deployed. He was the quiet type. Good man, real good man. Then something shifted in the room. One by one, others began to remember. Stories were shared about runs, about rides, about Daniel. One biker remembered how Maggie used to send care packages to the club, cookies, scarves, handwritten notes. You're Ghost's mom, he whispered. I never thought I'd meet you. Maggie's hands trembled just a little, but her voice stayed steady. I've been waiting a long time to hear someone say that again. In that cellar, beneath the roar of a dying storm, the lines between strangers and family blurred. For the first time in years, Margaret Caldwell wasn't just a widow or a grieving mother. She was mom again.
The morning after the storm, the world was painted in silence. The kind of silence that follows destruction, not peaceful, but heavy, like the air itself is holding its breath in grief. Jim was the first to climb the cellar stairs. He pushed open the door and blinked against the gray light filtering through broken clouds. What greeted him turned his stomach. The house was gone. Where Maggie's farmhouse once stood was now a jagged skeleton of splintered boards and twisted metal. Her porch had been ripped away, her truck thrown across the yard and wrapped around a sycamore like a discarded toy. What was once her kitchen was now a crater of shattered glass and broken memories. But the barn, remarkably, still stood, its roof partially torn, but the structure intact. And beneath it, the cellar had held. Against winds that reached over 170 miles per hour, it had protected 80 lives. Maggie emerged a few minutes later. She stood at the top of the stairs, taking in the devastation. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, with a weary breath and a half-smile, she murmured, "Well, I never did like that kitchen much anyway." Jim turned to her, surprised. Then he started to laugh. And once he started, he couldn't stop. The absurdity of survival, the wildness of what they'd just lived through, it poured out of him. Within seconds, others joined in, the laughter spreading through the group like fire through dry grass. It wasn't joy, it was release. It was the sound of men who had come face to face with death and lived to see another sunrise. "You're something else, Maggie," Jim said, wiping at his eyes. "You just lost everything and you're cracking jokes." "I didn't lose everything," she replied, gesturing to the men around her. "You're all still here. That's what matters." They stayed for a while, helping where they could, moving debris, salvaging what little had survived. Someone found Maggie's husband's dog tags, bent but not broken. Another pulled a scorched photo of Daniel from under a beam. They gave her food, water, and more blankets. When the sky started to clear, Jim approached her where she was sitting on a fallen plank.
You got family nearby? He asked gently. My sister's up in Springfield, she said. She's been begging me for years to move in with her. I suppose now I don't have much of a choice. Jim crouched down beside her. Not yet. We've got to get moving. There are more brothers waiting for us in Branson, but I want you to know something. He reached out and took her hand, his grip warm and steady. We're coming back, all of us. Give us 5 days. She looked at him, skeptical. 5 days? Jim nodded. Just trust me, we've got something to make right. Then, without another word, he stood and joined the others. One by one, the bikes fired up, engines rumbling like distant thunder. Maggie watched as they pulled away, a line of chrome and leather disappearing down the broken road. When the last one vanished from view, she sat on what remained of her front steps and let the tears come. She spent the next 4 nights at her sister Patricia's house. The guest room smelled like lavender and old furniture. Patricia was kind but overbearing, constantly fussing over Maggie's every move, offering herbal teas and pamphlets for retirement communities. "You should just stay here," Patricia said over breakfast on the 4th morning. "That old place was falling apart anyway. It's time to move on." Maggie didn't answer. Her eyes stayed on her coffee, swirling it slowly. Time to move on, as if 72 years of living could be packed into boxes and sealed shut like old photo albums. Her phone hadn't stopped ringing. Reporters wanted interviews. Churches offered donations. Social media had exploded with her story. A photo Jim had taken of Maggie in front of her shattered home, her hair wind-blown, her dress torn, but her eyes bright, had gone viral. The headline read, "Elderly woman shelters 79 bikers during tornado." She ignored it all. Then, on the morning of the 5th day, Patricia drove her back to what was left of her home to meet the insurance adjuster. The ride was quiet. Trees were still down, fences gone, debris lined every roadside. When they turned onto County Road 17, Maggie heard it before she saw it. Engines, not 1, not 10, but hundreds. They came in a wave, motorcycles stretching as far as the eye could see, both lanes filled with the roar of unity. Behind them were trucks hauling lumber, generators, roofing materials, and pallets of supplies. And leading the charge was Jim McKinley, helmet off, eyes gleaming, riding like a man with a mission. He pulled up beside Maggie and kicked down the stand. As the other bikes parked behind them, their engines quieted, replaced by a different kind of thunder. Boots hitting gravel, tools being unloaded, men barking orders. "Told you we'd be back," Jim said. Maggie stood frozen, tears welling in her eyes as she looked out over the crowd. "How many?" she asked softly. 312, he said, from 27 chapters, plus locals who heard the story and wanted to help. This ain't just a rebuild, it's a homecoming. She shook her head. I can't pay for any of this." Jim smiled. "You're not paying for anything. You already did 5 nights ago. We're just here to settle the debt." And with that, the work began. For the next 3 days, Margaret Caldwell's once empty property became a living, breathing construction site. The sound of hammers, drills, and laughter echoed from sunrise to long after dusk. Men in leather vests carried lumber like it was air, while others hoisted roof panels, dug trenches, wired outlets, and sanded floorboards. No one asked for money, no one asked for rest. They rotated in shifts. When one crew got tired, another picked up right where they left off. Volunteers came from neighboring towns. Local restaurants dropped off meals. One elderly couple brought lemonade and folding chairs. Even children stopped by to watch the miracle unfold. A new house rising from the wreckage, built by men most folks would have crossed the street to avoid just a week earlier. Maggie tried to help, of course. She insisted on sweeping, folding drop cloths, offering sandwiches, but every time she picked up a broom, one of the men would gently take it from her hands with a smile. "Not your job, Mom," they said. "Your job is to rest. We've got this." They had started calling her Mom without anyone officially deciding it. The name just settled into the air, natural as breath, and she didn't correct them.
On the 2nd day, a news crew arrived, then another. By evening, there were cameras everywhere, capturing the unlikely scene of hundreds of bikers building a home for a 72-year-old widow. Journalists asked questions, eager for drama, for tension, for something controversial.
But what they got instead was sincerity. When one reporter asked Maggie why she let the bikers in that night, her answer went viral. "They were people," she said simply, "and they were in danger. That's all I saw. The tornado scared me, not them." That clip was replayed millions of times across every platform. Her words became a rallying cry for empathy, a reminder to look past appearances. But Maggie wasn't chasing fame. She didn't care about hashtags or headlines. She only cared that she had found something she didn't even know she'd been missing: connection. Late in the afternoon on the third day, Jim found her sitting quietly behind the new barn, away from the noise. She held a photograph in her lap, Daniel, her son, standing next to his motorcycle, smiling at a younger version of Jim, both of them caught in a moment of joy long gone. "Mind if I sit?" Jim asked. Maggie nodded, patting the spot beside her. For a while, they just watched the house being painted, the way the sunlight glinted off the new roof, the way voices carried in the breeze. "I didn't think I'd ever have this again," she said softly. "A place that felt like home, a reason to cook dinner for someone." Jim looked down at his hands. Then he reached into his vest and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "We found this in the debris," he said, handing it to her. "Thought you should have it." Maggie unfolded the page, her hands trembling. The handwriting was familiar, slanted, careful, written in blue ink. It was a letter from Daniel. "Mom, if you're reading this, something happened, but I need you to know something. The club will always look after you. I made them promise. You're not just my mother, you're theirs too. If you ever need help, they'll come. I love you forever. Ghost." She couldn't speak. Tears slipped down her cheeks. For a long time, she just held the letter to her chest.
"We didn't know it existed," Jim said. "He gave it to our chapter president before his last deployment, but the old man passed, and the letter got lost in storage. One of our archivists recognized your name when the story went viral." "He made you promise," Maggie whispered, "all those years ago." "And we keep our promises," Jim said, placing his hand gently over hers. That night, the entire club gathered in the field beside the house. Torches flickered in the wind. 300 men stood shoulder to shoulder, vests shining under the stars. Jim stood before them and spoke. "Brothers, 40 years ago, a young man named Ghost joined our club. He rode with honor. Then he went to war and gave everything. Before he left, he made us swear to take care of his mother. Somewhere along the way, we failed to do that, but fate gave us a second chance." He turned toward Maggie. "Margaret Caldwell, by unanimous vote of all chapters present, we're giving you something no outsider has ever received." He stepped forward and placed a custom leather patch in her hands. It was the club's emblem, the lion with wings, encircled by gold stitching. Beneath it were the words, "Mother of the Rogue Lions. You're not just Ghost's mom, you're ours." Cheers erupted. Some men cried, others just stood in awe. Maggie, overwhelmed, could only place a hand over her heart. The house was finished that Sunday morning. It was a craftsman-style home with a wide front porch, rocking chairs, and solar panels on the roof. The new barn had Caldwell family carved into the beam above the door. Beside the front steps, 79 rose bushes had been planted, one for each life she saved that night. But the most remarkable thing was the plaque above the doorway. Hand-carved, it showed the club emblem surrounded by angel wings. The words beneath it read, "Here lives a true hero, Margaret Caldwell, mother of the Rogue Lions." That evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned gold, motorcycles began to roll up the long driveway again. Men with coolers, children chasing fireflies, lawn chairs being unfolded. Maggie stood on her porch, watching it all. "What's happening?" she asked Jim, who had just arrived with a pie in hand. "Sunday dinner," he said with a smile. "New tradition. Whoever's nearby comes to Mom's house." She laughed,
a sound that had been missing from her life for too long. "I didn't cook anything. We brought the food. You just be here." As the stars blinked awake, Maggie sat among her newfound family. The woman who had once believed her story was ending now realized something else entirely. It wasn't the end. It was the beginning.